Hello and welcome to your next session of your Business Administration course with Plato Training, where today we're going to be taking a look at making and receiving calls in business administration. So your aims and objectives for today's session. You will be making and receiving simulated voice calls, so I will tell you about that in a little while. You need to state how a caller's behaviour can make a positive impression and state how this could benefit the organisation. You need to identify examples of confidential information that you could encounter during business calls and identify how you would maintain confidentiality when you're welcoming visitors into the business. So the session today is a little bit different. If you attended the live session, you'll have an understanding of this already. So you still have questions to answer within today's session. However, you're going to be given a time slot by your tutor where you're going to make and receive calls. So the phone calls are mandatory, which means that you cannot achieve your certificates and finish the course unless you complete the phone calls. When you're working in business admin, you will be answering the phone lots and lots, so it is really good practice for you to build your confidence in this section. So I've put together some guidance on the next few slides about how these calls are going to happen. So voice call 1 is an outbound call. So this means that you're going to need to call your tutor during the allocated time slot. So we're going to be doing this on Microsoft Teams so that, fingers crossed, I can record it. When I am recording the calls, please note that they'll only be listened to by myself, by a lady called Jill, who marks my marking. Her role is IQA, Internal Quality Assessor, and perhaps by the SV, the Standards Verifier, from the exam board, but that's only once every 12 months that she'll request 2 or 3. So the scenario below is what you'll need to act out. So when you're ringing me, you need to pretend that you're ringing a cleaning company. So the scenario says you come into the office and notice that the rubbish has not been taken out and the floor is covered in small circles of paper from the hole punch yesterday. The cleaner is meant to clean the office each day before staff come in. Your manager asks you to call the cleaning company. Voice call 2. So this is an inbound call. This means you'll be receiving a call from me, so you need to answer the call that I give you during your allocated time slot. Once again, this will be done via Microsoft Teams, so I can record it, and again, it'll only be the same people that I mentioned on voice call 1 who will be listening. So you're going to be marked on the following criteria when you're answering the call. So you're going to answer the call promptly and politely, observing any organisational procedures. You're going to identify the caller, find out where they're calling from, and what is the reason for their call. You need to follow any organisational procedures relating to confidentiality and security, and be able to take a short message. So, voice call 1 does have a question for you to answer. So just a reminder that voice call 1 relates to you ringing the cleaning company because the bins have not been taken out and the floor's not been hoovered. But what is the purpose of the call that you are making? Why are you making this call? What purpose does that call have? So, are you asking for information? Are you informing that person? Are you marketing and advertising? What is the purpose of your call? So I'd like you to now answer question 1, which says, what is the purpose of the call? So identify the purpose using one sentence. Please pause this video whilst you complete the question. So we need to think about professional behaviours during phone calls. So think back to the scenario from yesterday with Mrs. van der Woodson, the school receptionist. The receptionist at the school could have been so much more professional in the way that she handled that call. So when you're working in an office and using the phone, you need to ensure that you are using behaviours that are going to create a positive impression for the customer and have a strong impact on the business overall. So what behaviours could this include? What are professional behaviours that you could use when you are on the phone? So you should be answering professionally using the company greeting. You should be introducing yourself. Answer within 2, maybe 3 rings so the customer is not waiting. If you smile whilst you're on the phone, you will come across as happier in your tone of voice. You need to take accurate messages, so make sure that you are repeating information back. For example, if they're giving you a telephone number to ring them back on, make sure you repeat the number back so that it is correct. You need to speak clearly, politely, and listen carefully. And you need to make sure that you've got knowledge to answer their questions. Don't just try and fob somebody off with information that you think might be correct. So how can all of these behaviours create a positive impression, and how can they benefit the organisation? So I've put together here a table with some ideas on. Of course, you do not have to use these ideas, you can use ideas yourself, but I just wanted to give you some ideas of how it could create a positive impression and how it can benefit the organisation by using professional telephone behaviours. So if we just take a look at the top one together, so answer professionally using the company greeting. How does this create a positive impression for the customer? Well, they'll know they've called the correct company. If a company answered by saying hello, you might think, oh, I might have misdialed this here. So how can this benefit the organisation? It's a professional and quality service, so each customer is being greeted with the same company greeting that comes across professional. So please pause this video here whilst you take a look at the others that I have placed in the table. So now you need to have a look at question 3. So question 3 says, when making and receiving calls with customers when working in an office, you need to ensure that you create a positive impression of the organisation. So you need to state how the caller's behaviour can create a positive impression and state how they can benefit the organisation. So you need to use full sentences and develop a statement of a minimum of 2 sentences. So I've put on here positive behaviour 1 and how this behaviour can create a positive impression for A, and B, how this can benefit the organisation. You do have to use 3 positive behaviours, so don't just skip straight ahead after you've done positive behaviour 1. There are 3 to complete, so you need to repeat the same process for behaviour 2 and behaviour 3. Remember, the previous slide is my ideas, so you do need to use your own ideas. You can use mine as inspiration if you're struggling, but please do not just directly copy. I create the material, so it's really easy for me to tell if you've copied. So outbound calls. So when we are making outbound calls, when we're calling people such as customers or other companies, you need to make sure that the phone number that you have and the contact name that you have are correct. You don't want to be ringing the wrong number, or you don't want to be asking for Dan if Dan left 2 months ago. So how could you do this? What could you do to make sure you have the right contact name and phone number for a company that you're calling? So you need to ensure the customer database, to check the customer database to find out the contact number and name. You need to make sure you know how to pronounce that name. So it could be that the name is unfamiliar to you. So you could perhaps ask a colleague if you're unsure. If you're phoning a business, you need to ensure the contact number that you have is up to date by either checking online or checking the company database. Your internal database should contain the contact numbers of contracted companies that you work with. So please now answer question 4. When making outbound calls, you need to make sure that you call the correct company and use the correct number. How could you confirm these details before making the call? Please pause this video to answer this question. Confidential information. So confidential information could be given to you on the phone or when you're welcoming visitors into the reception area of the office. So what examples of information might customers give you over the phone And what examples of confidential information might customers give you when you are welcoming them into the business? So over the phone, obviously these are just examples. You could have previous experience where you've had different information over the phone. So names, addresses, dates of birth, national insurance numbers, it could be credit card numbers, health issues, maybe even a passport or driving license number. When you're welcoming visitors, it'll be their names, why they're attending. If they need to give ID to you, you could have copies of passports. Sometimes you put your car registration details down when you're signing into a business, so that those details might be there as well. Try and think of some of your own examples here too. Why must these details be treated as confidential? And how can we ensure that confidential information is kept safe? So we looked at this previously when we looked at policies and procedures. We looked at confidentiality, and we've looked at laws and regulations, Data Protection Act and GDPR. So you should have some idea of what you might be thinking about here. So of course we must treat it as confidential because of those laws that we just talked about there, Data Protection Act and GDPR. How can we ensure it's kept safe? So only storing the information that is needed for as long as it is needed, not sharing it with others, shredding any notes, paper notes that we don't need, ensuring passwords are used to protect data, like on the database or your email, and ensuring locks are used on the filing cabinets to make sure that paper-based data is protected. So for question 5, this question only relates to talking on the phone. So when you're talking to customers over the phone, you must ensure that you do not breach confidentiality. So you need to identify 2 pieces of confidential information, and for each piece you need to show how you're going to keep it safe and secure. So part A is your first piece, and you're going to show how you're going to keep that secure, and part B is your second piece, and you're going to show how you keep that piece secure. So remember, this part is only over the phone. We're going to look at welcoming visitors on question 6. So 2 examples of confidential information, and for each example, how you're going to keep that confidential. Please pause the video here. For question 6, similar again, except this time we are looking at welcoming visitors. So you've got to make sure that you do not breach confidentiality when you are welcoming visitors as well. So you're going to identify confidential information and show how to keep it safe and secure. So you're going to do the same thing again. You're going to identify 2 pieces of confidential information and identify how each piece will be kept confidential. So your first piece of confidential information is on part A, and you're going to tell me how you're going to keep that confidential. And your second piece of information is on part B, and you're going to be telling me how you can keep that confidential. So remember, this is all about welcoming visitors for question 6, not about phones. Please pause this video. Security in the office. So how can we make sure that people do not enter the office and access personal data? What measures can we put in place to ensure that data is definitely secure? So once again, we need to think about those locked filing cabinets, passwords, not just any password, but updated passwords as well. You've got to get your visitors to sign in, and you've got to get them wearing visitor badges so that they're identifiable as a visitor in the business. And most of the time, visitors are to be supervised at all times. So what if there was somebody in the office without a visitor badge? What would you need to do? In this case, you need to ensure that you are alerting the person who is in charge of security. Perhaps you do have security guards in your building. You need to ensure that your manager is aware, because this person may need to be escorted off the premises by security and potentially police because they could have tampered with data. It could be that it's somebody who's come in for interview and they haven't signed in because there was nobody at the desk, so it's always better to make sure before we go ahead with security and police in these situations, but it can be a detrimental data breach. So for question 7, I would like you to identify how we can ensure that people do not enter the building and access information that is confidential. So for today's learning and activity log, you need to have today's date. Your aim is business administration. The activities and what I learned, so we've looked at making and receiving calls, and today I have learned. Your next session, we're looking at social media for business, part 1, and your next session date is Tuesday. So that brings us back to your aims and objectives, where you should have now taken part in making and receiving voice calls. You should be able to state how a caller's behaviour can make a positive impression on the customer and how it can benefit the organisation. You should have been able to identify confidential information that you could encounter during business phone calls and identify how you would maintain confidentiality when welcoming visitors into the business.